Hi everybody, welcome to this webinar on Alpine Solar projects and the question of whether they can be a solution for more electricity during winter months and at the same time also for more local added value. My name is Pascal Vuichard. I'm a postdoc at the chair of Vuichard, and I'm very happy to talk to you about this topic. As you might know, the webinar as such will be held in German. That's why I will be recording for you my intro session in English, and also the slides by our two experts will be available in English for you as well. This altogether will of course help you to answer our multiple choice questions for this webinar. All right, let's get started. We have a nice webinar lined up for you on the set topic, including two members of our team, myself and my colleague Alexander Stauch, who has also been researching with me on this topic. And we have invited two guest speakers, one of them being Bertram Fleck. He is a former politician, district chief executive in Germany, and very well known for kind of having lots of local benefits from the energy transition on site in his region. And the other expert is Guillaume Fuchs. He is the project leader of the first floating PV system installed and working here in Switzerland. Looking forward to an interesting discussion. Quickly on the agenda, as mentioned, I will have a brief outline from the perspective of social acceptance before we go or hand it over to our two experts. My colleague Alex will then finish up the webinar with a kind of interactive discussion at the end. All right, Alpine Solar, a brief outline from the perspective of social acceptance. Very much looking forward to give you some more insights on this topic. Let's start. First of all, maybe why Alpine solar projects? Answer is pretty straightforward. Conditions are great. So we have lots of solar irradiation. We have less foggy days. We have even reflection from the snow. This altogether makes it just a lot more efficient to have solar panels in Alpine regions. Additionally, we can also generate electricity more evenly distributed over the year, so lots more electricity during winter months compared to having solar PV plants in the lower regions of Switzerland. At the same time, you might figure putting big solar projects into Alpine regions, this changes the landscape and may therefore also face some resistance from the population, so-called social acceptance issues. We also see in literature that changing landscape in Alpine regions tends to be something of high sensitivity. So it might not be that easy to change the landscape in Alpine regions with whatsoever project you want to do. What we also see is that the main research activity in the field of social acceptance for renewable energy projects has been done for wind energy projects. So this might be known to you, lots of resistance for wind energy projects and lots of also findings on how to kind of increase social acceptance for wind energy projects. Not so much has been done for utility scale solar PV projects, and that's what we wanted to change. And what our insights were from the project is going to be the content of the next few minutes. As research, it's of course always very important to have a look at what is being discussed in literature. If we look into literature, we can see that we find very high levels of social acceptance for solar energy, even if you kind of switch from international focus to a national level. So solar energy seems to be a very, very favored technology from a point of view of acceptance. We also see that procedural justice and distributional justice, so two very important elements of social acceptance, so-called fair decision processes for the procedural justice part and kind of the distribution of the project costs and benefits, so-called distributional justice, are very much discussed, and their impacts on the social acceptance levels are very much discussed in literature. We can also see that a high degree of kind of involving people in the decision-making process and kind of distributing the benefits and costs evenly can have a positive influence on the overall social acceptance of renewable energy project. And what we also see is that visual impacts of renewable energy projects is one of the most frequently discussed negative effect. And you also see different scholars examining then also kind of aesthetics, color, texture elements in order to counteract, of course, the visual impacts of such projects. So these just a few glances from literature, which of course are very important for, or were very important for our project, which we did and which I'm going to present to you now. So what we did, looking at social acceptance of utility scale solar PV projects in Alpine regions, we applied a so-called conjoint experiment, choice-based conjoint experiment. What is that? Basically, each participant, which we chose from a very big representative sample of Switzerland, had to choose between 3 different Alpine projects, which varied with different attributes and levels, and one non-option, which could be chosen if none of these proposed 3 projects were acceptable. So there was kind of the choice and the participants had to make. We had 1,036 participants, each of them carrying out 8 choices. So in total, we had over 8,000 choice tasks. So it's one of the first, or the first, large-scale study on social acceptance of utility-scale solar projects. They were, of course, also shown a prototype PV project in Alpine regions. You can see it here on the right-hand side on the slide. It's a project which is kind of ground-mounted in the landscape, but very near to existing infrastructures, like, for example, the mountain kind of cable car stuff, which you see here on the right, and also kind of close to the villages. All right, so I've talked about different attributes of such a project. You can see them here on the left-hand side. So we included the design, which was mentioned to be important in literature. We included ownership and ecological impact, also 2 very important attributes when talking about social acceptance. And we included the mentioned 2 important aspects, distributional and procedural justice. Those attributes had different levels. So for example, for ownership, we had levels ranging from international energy company to very local ownership. Ecological impact was more kind of large impact versus kind of net positive almost. Distributional justice was from kind of hardly any local benefits to kind of different benefit sharing systems for the inhabitants, and procedural justice kind of ranged from no further than kind of legally required to almost kind of co-deciding on what the project should look like. And what the design attribute levels look like, we'll show you in a minute. Kind of what does it look like in the end? The conjoint experiment is something like this. So you can see here again the different attributes on the left, and then the 3 different projects and the non-option. And if you would kind of move with your cursor above these different elements, you'll get an extra explanation for them. All right, let's go back to design. I mentioned to you design elements. We had the kind of conventional panels. We had the green panels, so kind of adjusted to nature, color adjusted. We had art elements, kind of solar plant visualized as a Capricorn, kind of similar to the big solar PV plants in China, which are kind of looking like pandas. And we had also kind of the solar plant which kind of looking as a Swiss flag, which can be done nowadays. You lose about 10% efficiency if you kind of color the panels. So that's what the setup was. Now let's look at the more interesting part. Of course, what were the results? First of all, we see a very high acceptance for such projects. 64% of all participants would accept such a project, which is what is interesting even more is that we see in Alpine regions, so actually regions which would be affected by such projects, we can see a higher level of acceptance, which looks like to a please in my backyard effect. And we can also see the political impacts. So as with many renewable energy projects, center and left voters are more willing to accept compared to conservative voters. But even for conservative voters, the medium average acceptance level is still positive. If we can look at the different attributes, so which of the project attributes are most important for social acceptance, we can see that design, ownership, and ecological impact are the three top attributes which define the social acceptance of such a project. You can see here design is by far the most important attribute, and what the different levels look like we can see in a minute. We can also see that distributional and procedural justice can help to increase social acceptance, but they are not the most important elements for it. So other attributes such as design or ownership play a greater role. If you look at the different levels, at the different partner of utilities, as it is called, we can see for the design attribute that green panels are strongly preferred over conventional panels. Sadly, the art elements did not succeeded in convincing the respondents. The Swiss flag and also the animal design were not very much favored. Looking at ownership, you can see that that local utility with involvement of inhabitants would be the most popular choice. So keeping it local is important. For the three other attributes, we can see that for ecological impact, the level with the least impact is most popular. That's not very surprising. And for distributional and procedural justice, we can see that also the level with the highest intensity is the favored one, which also does make sense. One quick word on the non-option here. We can see that the value is very, very negative, which is again supporting our claim that the general acceptance for such projects are very high. So most people actually chose one of the three projects over the non-option. All right, this is almost it from my side for the quick introduction into the topic. What can we say from concluding remarks? So from a general point of view, from social acceptance point of view, solar projects in Alpine regions are very much promising for electricity production in the winter season. We can see a PIMBY effect, which can also be explained, for example, with economic opportunities such as job creation, service contracts. That's why also local management is desired. So local regions want local management also because of economic opportunities. And if you look at practice, so far Switzerland has no ground-mounted PV systems planned in Alpine regions. We have some hydrodam Alpine projects planned. One floating PV system realized, which we're going to hear about later, but at least from our point of view, big potential not only for electricity production during winter months, but also especially for Alpine regions to generate local added value. All right, thank you very much for your attention. Now it's time to hand it over to our experts. Looking forward to the discussion and your questions.